I wanted to turn to a clip of Dr. King. This is from the famous address in 1963, August 28th.
I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. I have a dream that one day on the red hills of Georgia, the sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood. I have a dream that one day, even the state of Mississippi, a state sweltering with the heat of injustice, sweltering with the heat of oppression, will be transformed into an oasis of freedom and justice. I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today.
On this eve of Martin Luther King's birthday, we want to bring Michelle Alexander into this discussion and talk about Black America. Today, there are more African Americans under correctional control, whether in prison or jail, on probation or on parole, than there were enslaved in 1850. And more African American men are disenfranchised now because of felon disenfranchisement laws than in 1870.
A legal scholar and civil rights advocate, Michelle Alexander, has argued in her recent book that although Jim Crow laws have been eliminated, the racial caste system it set up remains intact. It's simply been redesigned, and now racial control functions through the criminal justice system. Michelle Alexander is the author of The New Jim Crow, Mass Incarceration in the Age of Colorblindness, former director of the Racial Justice Project at the ACLU of Northern California, now holds a joint appointment at the Kirwan Institute for the Study of Race and Ethnicity and the Moritz College of Law at Ohio State University. Welcome to Democracy Now!, Michelle Alexander, as you join with Randall Robinson in this discussion. It's also the 100th anniversary of the ANC in South Africa, and you have talked about how there are more African Americans percentage-wise imprisoned in the United States, more Black people, than were at the height of apartheid South Africa.
Yes, yes. You know, I think we've become blind in this country to the ways in which we've managed to reinvent a caste-like system here in the United States, one that functions in a manner that is as oppressive in many respects as the one that existed in South Africa under apartheid and that existed under Jim Crow here in the United States. Although our rules and laws are now officially colorblind, they operate to discriminate in a grossly disproportionate fashion. Through the war on drugs and the Get Tough movement, millions of poor people, overwhelmingly poor people of color, have been swept into our nation's prisons and jails, branded criminals and felons, primarily for nonviolent and drug-related crimes, the very sorts of crimes that occur with roughly equal frequency in middle-class white neighborhoods and in college campuses, but go largely ignored. Branded criminals and felons, and then are ushered into a permanent second-class status where they're stripped of the many rights supposedly won in the civil rights movement, like the right to vote, the right to serve on juries, and the right to be free of legal discrimination in employment, housing, access to education, and public benefits.
Well, one of the fascinating things in the book, which has now been reissued in paperback, is you talk about your own sort of journey of realizing this, that even as an activist, civil rights, a legal activist, that you were not clearly aware of the depth and the extensiveness of this mass incarceration?
Yeah, I admit in the introduction to the book that I was blind for a long time, even as a civil rights lawyer, someone who cared deeply about racial justice and who thought I knew as a lawyer how the criminal justice system functioned. I was blind. It was really only after years of representing victims of racial profiling and police brutality and investigating patterns of drug law enforcement in poor communities of color and attempting to assist people re-enter into a society that had never shown much use for them in the first place, that I had a series of experiences that really began my own awakening. I began to see that our criminal justice system does in fact operate more like a caste system than a system of crime prevention or control, and that so many of the myths that we are fed about why our prison system has exploded in the past 30 years, why we now have the highest rate of incarceration in the world, just don't even pass the laugh test. Once you take a close look at them. It is not the case that our prison population has exploded due to a surge in crime or crime rates. It is not true that people of color are more likely to commit drug-related crimes than white. So many of the excuses that have been offered actually just aren't true once you dig a little deeper, and my book is an effort to do just that.
And let's talk about what happens when you have a person going to prison, how that affects the rest of their life. First of all, just the astounding figures. It's only half the young black men in this country have been incarcerated or on parole or probation. Half.
Yes, well, in large urban areas, half or more than half of working-age African-American men now have criminal records and are thus subject to legalized discrimination for the rest of their lives. In some cities like Chicago, it's been estimated that nearly 80% of working-age African-American men have criminal records and are now part of this undercaste, a group of people defined largely by race that are relegated to a permanent second-class status by law.
What it means, for example, for housing.
Yes. Well, I think most people have a general sense that when you're released from prison, life is hard, but, if you work hard and apply self-discipline and stay out of trouble, you can make it. But that's true only for a relative few. When people are released from prison and have a criminal record, they are discriminated against for the rest of their life in employment. For the rest of their life, they got to check that box on employment applications, knowing that application is likely going straight to the trash.
Sometimes not even convicted, you have to say you were arrested.
Yes, absolutely. And in public housing, you can be barred from public housing just based on an arrest. You don't even have to be convicted. People returning home from prison want to return to their children or their families. Their families risk eviction just by allowing their loved ones to come home to them. Under federal law, you're deemed ineligible for food stamps for the rest of your life if you've been convicted of a drug felony. Now, fortunately, many states have now opted out of the federal ban on food stamps for drug offenders, but it's still the case that thousands of people can't even get food stamps, because they were once caught with drugs.
I'd like to bring Randall Robinson into the conversation. When you were at Trans-Africa and we were working in Washington, the climate in Washington in the 80s and 90s was just more incarceration. Did any of the political leaders that you dealt with realize the long-term impact of what was happening?
I recall that when we were first being arrested at the embassy and I went to jail that first night, everyone in the lockup with me was black.
This was, you were being arrested for protesting apartheid.
For protesting at the embassy. Everyone was black, and I had some sense of this. I think at the time I was told that 1 out of every 3 young black males in the District of Columbia was under one or another arm of the criminal justice system. And what stunned me about it, and what continues to bother me about it, is that when we were struggling during a civil rights movement, some of us were in better positions to benefit from this change that was coming. than others were. And so while we had all been in the same boat during segregation, when change came, we weren't all in the same boat anymore. Some of us could escape, but others of us were bottom stuck. And I don't believe that those of us who escaped worked as hard, as tenaciously since to remember those of us who could not. And the result is that we now see our future as a people in America being warehoused. How can we not be concerned in some relentless way about the fate of all of these young black people who are being imprisoned? Because we are indissolubly bound up with them. Their future is our future. Our future is their future. And we have to be mindful of that. But it doesn't so much penetrate if we don't have news of it every day. So many people don't know.
Yes.
In the same way that you said, you have done extraordinary work. I mean, I'm so impressed by the work that you have done. And it is so needed to get us to understand that it is a harness that we all have to get in and pull in.
We're going to break and then come back to this discussion on this eve of Martin Luther King weekend. We're speaking with Randall Robinson. His latest book is his second novel. It's called Makeda. It is set in the dawn of the civil rights era. And we're joined by Michelle Alexander. Her book has just come out in paperback. It's called The New Jim Crow, Mass Incarceration in the Age of Colorblindness. When we come back, we're also going to talk about what it means in this country, mass incarceration, when it comes to voting and determining who are the representatives of the people of this country. Stay with us.